Hi guys, welcome back. My name is Harris and I'm an investment associate and CFA charter holder, and in today's video I'm going to walk you through exactly how to crush the CFA Level 1 exam. So I completed the charter earlier this year, scoring in the 90th percentile at all applicable levels including Level 1, and if you hang around today I'm going to show you exactly how I did that. The video will be split into two. In the first part I'll give you an overview of the curriculum and the exam, and in the second part I'll go through specific tips to help you smash it. Let's get into it. Okay, let's start with an overview, and unsurprisingly CFA Level 1 is designed to be introductory in nature, so it very much sets the scene, it introduces you to financial concepts and forms the foundation of much deeper study at Level 2 and 3. So as a result, if you studied something like finance, economics or accounting at university, you probably came across some of these topics already, and if not, if you were like me and you studied something else unrelated, it's actually a great place to start and establish foundations. Conceptually, it's not too difficult, and if you put the time in, doing the exam and acing the exam is actually relatively straightforward. The challenge lies in the volume of content and the fact you have to do it alongside work. And that's where study strategy becomes important, and I'll link you to somewhere on the screen or in the description where I go through that in detail. So in terms of topics, there are 10 modules, and those are ethics, quantitative analysis, FSA or financial statement analysis, economics, fixed income, equity, derivatives, alternative investments, portfolio management, and corporate finance. That's a long list. So the respective weights of these modules varies, and there are some implications for this which I'll cover in the tips and techniques, but I'll put them on the screen just for you to see. So as I said, conceptually this level is not too difficult, but the challenge lies in the volume and the fact that you're getting used to studying alongside work. So the guideline amount of time is around 300 hours. I think that's probably about right. You could maybe do it in less, but you probably compromise the quality of your study, and that will come back to bite you at Level 2 and 3. But as a general rule of thumb, you need roughly 3 to 6 months and around 300 hours to get this level done. In terms of the exam, it's 180 multiple choice questions. There's no vignettes, meaning there's no passage of information which then leads on to 4 or 5 related questions. It's just one small bit of information, then the question, and then you move on to a new bit of info and then a new question. So they're all independent of each other. They're much more direct. There's a lot less information to digest, and therefore it's much simpler in general to sit the exam. It's also primarily define, recall and single step calculations, so not that many cognitive steps between the question and the answer, so therefore it is the simplest level. Okay, let's go into the tips. So the first one is learn to use your calculator effectively. I can't emphasize this enough. There's quite a lot of calculation at Level 1 and 2. If you don't learn to use the calculator, you'll have to do the calculations manually, and that will set you back and put you under time pressure. There's only a couple of brands that you can use, and that is the HP and the Texas Instruments one. I don't know a lot about HP, but I use the Texas one, and that's what most people use, and the model is the BA2 Plus, and there is a basic and a pro version. Now, there's not a huge difference between the two. The main one is the build quality. I actually ended up buying the Pro because the buttons are sturdier and they actually register when you press them, whereas with the basic one I found that sometimes I'd press it at speed and it wouldn't recognize it, and when you're doing calculations at speed in the exam, you don't want the calculator to not register the fact you pressed it. So firstly, I'd recommend buying the Pro for that, but secondly, you actually want to have two in the exam, because if one goes bust, they will not provide you with a replacement, and you need to have a second one on hand to start using, because as I said, if you don't use a calculator, the calculations take a lot longer and that will put you into time pressure. So I recommend buying both, keep the basic one in reserve, and then keep the Pro as your main use. You need to get very familiar with using the time value for money calculations, the cash flow, the NPV, the IRR, all of these things. I'm not going to go into what they are because it comes up a lot in quantitative analysis, fixed income, corporate issuers or corporate finance, whatever. So get very familiar with those. Also, set your calculator to 9 decimal places, the maximum number, and then use the memory function when you're doing the calculations. So calculate something, commit it to memory, and then use that in the next step of the calculation. If you start rounding off and writing it on paper and then inputting it back into the calculator, your final answer may be a few decimal points off, and when you round that to 2 decimal points and put it down, it might differ to the options they presented you. So use the memory function and do it to 9 decimal places. Right, so moving on to the second point, which is weightings. Now, at Level 1, these do vary. So ethics has the highest weighting, 15 to 20%, and alternative investments and derivatives have the lowest weighting at roughly 5 to 8%. So glean from this what you will, but ultimately ethics is the most important topic in this exam. To highlight the importance of ethics, CFA actually have a modifier associated with your ethics score. I don't know exactly how it's described, but ultimately, if you're on the threshold between passing and failing, if you did really well in ethics, they may well move you above the bar, and if you did poorly in ethics, they may move you below it. So bear that in mind. You need to do well in ethics. However, it's also quite difficult to study for it, and if it appears first in the order of topics, that does not mean you should study it first. And the reason is it's actually not very intuitive and it's difficult to retain the information. So I would recommend you actually study it later in your study plan towards the end, and then commit it to your short-term memory and then go and do the exam, because otherwise you'll likely find that if you study at the start, you'll forget it by the end. You'll have to go through it several times anyway. So better to do it later, commit it to short-term memory, and then do the exam, but don't skim over it. So if you shouldn't start with ethics, what should you start with? Well, the answer to that is quantitative analysis. And the reason for that is the time value of money concept is very important, both at level 1, but also throughout the entire charter. So you really need to spend time getting your head around that, really absorbing it and knowing it intuitively, because you're going to need it in fixed income, in corporate finance, in a whole host of other topics. So commit that to memory, commit it to your intuition. You need to spend time on it. And as I mentioned earlier on, this is where the calculator becomes important as well, because you're going to need to do those time value of money calculations, and if you do them by hand, they take a lot longer than on the calculator. So nail that. Then the two biggest and most difficult topics, I guess in some ways, to get through are FSA, financial statement analysis, and fixed income. FSA is just long, so you're going to need a lot of time to do that, so do it early in the process. And fixed income is something you probably didn't come across even if you did something finance related at university. So it's conceptually a bit more difficult to understand, and again, relatively meaty. So I would do FSA and fixed income relatively soon after you've done quant, and then go back to them later in your studies as well. FSA generally is something that you're going to need to understand quite well. It's essentially accounting, right? So if you want to work in finance, you need to know this quite well. And fixed income is something that gets incredibly hard as you go into level 2 and 3, especially if you don't know the foundations. So spend time on that too. The rest of them, it doesn't really matter what order you do it in. I'm going to link a video below to Mark Meldrum's suggested order, and this is very helpful and you should watch this. It goes into more detail as to how the sort of various topics link together. It's outside the remit of this video, but I'll link it anyway. One point to note on portfolio management: the weight is actually quite small, so 5 to 8%. It's a bit techie and it can be difficult to get your head around, and there's a temptation to skim over it as a result, but actually it becomes a huge part of the curriculum, especially at level 3. So if you don't spend time at least getting your head around it, you'll find that when you get to level 2 and 3, you'll actually regret that a bit, because it becomes a huge part of the curriculum. So try and make some time in your study plan to do portfolio management and do it well. Okay, the final thing on this list of tips is to do as many practice questions as possible. At level 1, the question bank on CFAI's portal and any other provider that you have are probably very representative of what you're going to get in the exam. So if you do lots and lots of practice questions, you will actually be quite well prepared. At level 2, it becomes less related, although it's still quite a good strategy. And then level 3, it becomes very hard. So level 1, if you do lots and lots of practice questions, you'll be in a good position. So prioritize at least 1 month, possibly even 6 to 8 weeks out from the final exam. Start doing the questions and smash them out. And if you do that, you'll be well prepared. Okay, that is a general overview and a full list of tips to help me smash the exam. Hopefully it does the same for you. If you like this, hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you'd like to see anything else related to this. I'll make a similar one for level 2 and 3 in due course. I hope this helps. Thanks, and see you in the next video.